like to introduce our speakers for today. That's going to be going over a new disease to watch for, corn stunt. We have Anthony Zukoff, Extension Associate out of the Southwest Research Center of Garden City. And then we have Rodrigo Onofre, our K-State Research and Extension row crop plant pathologist. So with that, I'll turn it over to our first speaker.
All right, let me get going here. All right, everybody see that slide? All right, good. So yeah, so we're here to talk about corn leafhopper today and the pathogens it spreads. I'm gonna discuss the insect itself, basic biology, the damage it causes, and some things we know and don't know about it in regard to what it means for Kansas and historical ranges. And then I'll pass it over to Rodrigo. So the first thing I want to do is ask a question. We've been doing our best effort in Kansas to kind of spread the message about this potential new corn production problem. And I just was wondering if folks that are participating today could provide some feedback about, the level of awareness about this potential new pest, because we still don't know what it means for Kansas, but I've been trying to gauge people's awareness about this issue so that we can do a good job making sure folks are aware of it. So if you can, provide some feedback, that would be great, and we'll move on from there.
So your options are A, the community is very aware, B, community is somewhat aware, C, community is not aware. And we've got 15 responses. We'll give you guys just a couple more seconds. If you're joining us on YouTube, if you would type those into the chat box once you have signed into YouTube, we can get your results also. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll end the poll here. And I will share the results. Okay. Anthony, can you see those results?
Yeah, I can. Okay, so that's really good to know. I think we need to get our messaging out there even more before corn planting season starts based on those results. And so we're gonna definitely be doing that in any way we can. So look out for future e-updates and insect newsletters from the entomology department. And obviously, if folks are attending today, please share this information with your community too, just so people are aware. Because we don't know what this means still, but we all need to have it on our radar. So thank you so much for everyone who contributed to that poll.
And when Anthony mentions the e-updates, that's the K-State Agronomy e-update. If you are not currently receiving that, you can send me an email. We'll get you signed up on the list. We'll drop the link in the chat box if you guys would like to register to get those. They're a weekly update that comes out, and Anthony is excellent about getting information in on about what he's seeing out in the field.
Thank you. Yeah, the agronomy e-update is great. Source to get stuff out there in a timely manner. So we'll continue here. Like I said, I wanted to spend some time just making people aware of, there we go, making people aware of so leafhoppers. We have a lot of different pests in Kansas, row crop production. Leafhoppers don't tend to be something that people ever hear about or talk about. But leafhoppers are a very common insect. They're found worldwide. They're in the true bug family, Hemiptera. And of the 10,000 species of true bugs, a third of those are leafhoppers. So they're found, like I said, worldwide. Anywhere there's vegetation, you're going to find leafhoppers. And as you can see from the slide, they're extremely variable in coloration and size, things like that, very variable insects, but they're all plant feeders. Some of them have very specific host requirements like the corn leafhopper. Others just feed on a bunch of different plants and they're not really a big issue. But just to give you an idea, leafhoppers are very abundant, very variable, and all around us, and we just don't tend to know about them typically as a agronomic pest. And just to give you some perspective about where leafhoppers fit in the insect world, they're related to some other pests that we do commonly know about, like aphids, um, uh, cicadas, tree hoppers, think mealybugs. So they're related to those kind of things. Just to give you a little bit of perspective, particularly the aphids. So if you think about leafhoppers, think about aphids. That's how you kind of make a connection there. And when it comes to agricultural pest issues with leafhoppers, that's really nothing new. Leafhoppers have been agricultural pests of row crops, of horticultural crops, landscaping, produce for, hundreds of years. They're, like I said, worldwide, but in general, it's, speaking for most insect groups, it's really just a handful that are major pests. To think about Kansas, for example, potato leafhopper has been a historic pest of alfalfa. Every few years, there can be some significant early season losses in alfalfa due to potato leafhopper. So we do have that pest in Kansas, still not very commonly talked about. Talking about maybe nationwide, worldwide, beet leafhopper is a very significant leafhopper pest. It impacts a lot of different produce commodities. It does spread a disease that causes defoliation or um, leaves to curl. It basically makes produce unmarketable. So that's an example of a kind of widespread, significant leafhopper pest in the country that spreads an actual pathogen. The potato leafhopper doesn't do that in Kansas. It just damages plants. Just to briefly talk about the life cycle of leafhoppers, they're all pretty similar, depending on the latitude and in the season temperatures. You'll have a variability in life cycle timing, but you have an adult female, she'll lay her eggs in the plant material itself. So those eggs will be planted, laid in the leaf tissue, and they will be protected from predators, from pesticides, things like that. And so leafhoppers have a really good advantage on actually getting all their eggs to hatch from the start. And then they'll go through several life cycle stages. All the stages look similar to adults, but they do not have I'm sorry, they do not have wings. As they become more adult, they'll get their wings, and then when they're adult, they'll have wings and be more mobile. But they all look very similar as they go through the stages. It's called incomplete metamorphosis. But it's important to understand that all stages cause the same kind of damage. So you'll have a mixture of adults and all these different nymphal stages that are doing the same thing in a field. And you could go from an adult to an egg to an adult in 10 to 14 days, depending on where you're at and the temperatures. So you could have rapid population buildup given this particular insect's life cycle. So that's important to understand when considering leafhoppers as a pest.
Anthony, there was one question that came in and asked how many generations per year then, if they're doing that completion in 14 days.
That's a good question. And so for this particular leafhopper, we don't know really for Kansas yet. But the good general rule of thumb, the further south you go in the country, the more generations you'll have because it's warmer earlier. The estimation now, from what I've read in the literature, in Kansas, I'd say, depending on when they show up and what the weather's like, I mean, geez, 10 generations. I mean, it could be rapid. I mean, just depends because you have a generation every 2 weeks. That's conservative. And if we're talking about the growing season, so maybe starting June through the freeze, I mean, you can have 2 generations a month. So yeah, keep that in mind. That's a really good question. We still don't know because there's a lot of other factors that go into that. predators, parasitoids, things like that. You know, people spraying pesticides. It just depends. But I guess the take-home message is that this particular group of insects can have a lot of generations potentially. Okay, it's kind of like spider mites. Spider mites can go crazy. But for their damage, getting into that, they're true bugs, so they have piercing, sucking mouth parts. They will basically put their beaks into the plant material. And if you look at the bottom left of your screen, I believe, you see that big red beak on that one particular true bug. That is a wheel bug. That's not a leafhopper. I picked it because it's such a large insect and you can see the beak really well. But that beak basically is what's on a leafhopper. And so they're going to pierce the tissue of the plant. And what they do is when they, and put their beak into the plant, they're going to start injecting digestive enzymes. And so they're going to be basically digesting that plant material and then, drinking it up like a milkshake. All right. And so that's what they're doing. And so you get what people talk about as hopper burn, which when you're scouting alfalfa for potato leafhopper, you're looking for that, bleached out yellow, scorched looking upper canopy leaf material because they're destroying that cell tissue, extracting all the chlorophyll and killing it. And so they're destroying the leaf material outright just by feeding. They're causing potentially secondary infections from other pathogens. If the plants are young enough, they will just outright die if there's enough leafhoppers, attacking a particular plant. And photosynthesis is going to be reduced, and you're just going to have plant vigor reduced because of that direct feeding damage. So that is something they do for their damage. A secondary thing, as they're feeding, they're secreting waste, which is called honeydew. If you're familiar with a lot of aphid pests, aphids secrete honeydew, and their waste is extremely condensed, sugary liquid. And it's going to coat the leaf surfaces, promote sooty mold. That's going to further reduce photosynthesis and just contribute to other pathogens and plant vigor decline. And just a little quick tip, when you're scouting for aphids and these leafhoppers, you can use this honeydew to your advantage because it's going to attract a lot of beneficial insects, ladybugs, butterflies, wasps, bees, all kinds of stuff will be flocking to these areas where there's a lot of honeydew. And when I go out into a field, for example, when I'm scouting for sorghum midge or sorghum aphid, I will just look at the field when I get there and see if I see any spots of heightened insect activity, bees, flies, whatever. And I will walk to that spot, and then I usually will find sorghum aphid colonies. And so you could do the same thing with leafhopper, the corn leafhopper. Late in the season this past year, in a bunch of volunteer corn, there's a lot of honeydew. I could look at a field of wheat with a bunch of volunteer corn, see butterflies and bees and wasps just hanging out, and I'd go over there and find corn leaf hoppers. So, pro tip. So the biggest risk of damage for this particular leafhopper comes from disease transmission. And again, like I said earlier, they're going to be transmitting their salivary gland digestive enzymes into the plant before they can, uptake the digested plant material. And that salivary gland is typically going to have the pathogens. And so that's how it infects a plant. So that's how disease transmission occurs with this particular leafhopper, and I'll let Rodrigo highlight all that stuff. But pathogens delivered from leafhoppers is really well documented. There's over 50 plant viruses known to be vectored by leafhoppers worldwide, so it's nothing new. Like I said, it's a handful of them that really are a big problem because they transfer pathogens that impact production. A lot of them are very innocuous, like I said, but that's just kind of an overall how they're most damaging. This particular leafhopper is because of the corn stunt disease transfer. And the important part of this is understanding, obviously, how to identify the insect itself. Identification of the disease is a bit more involved, and Rodrigo will talk about that. We're lucky that this particular leafhopper is pretty easy to identify. They're very small, just about 1/8 of an inch long at maturity. So the immature ones are very, very small, but they're kind of like splinter, wedge-like, tiny little insects, tan to yellowish. The color can vary a little bit, but they definitely won't ever be green. And the big thing is there's 2 dark spots between the eyes. You will need magnification. There are other leafhoppers out there active year-round, but you will need to use a hand lens. You can do it in the field. It can be difficult, but getting under a microscope or getting it to, extension agent or myself, that would be best. But those 2 dark spots between the eyes are important. We are going to be sending off Kansas specimens for molecular testing to verify that we are dealing with the exact species that we think we are. In southern latitudes, there are some very similar species, and we just want to make sure we can eliminate those from what we are finding in Kansas. And another caveat to that is there is a very common leafhopper in the Midwest throughout the country called the Aster leafhopper. It does have 2 dark spots between the eyes, as you can see in that top left photo, just like the corn leafhopper has 2 dark spots. But the Aster leafhopper, as you can see, has those additional 4 dark bars. So another common name for the Aster leafhopper is the 6-spotted leafhopper. So you can see those additional markings. The corn leafhopper does not have those additional markings, and you don't have to use your imagination to see it. So keep that in mind, because that's something just to be aware of, that we have been picking up on traps, I assume. So keep that in mind. Behavior, real quick. This is a reference picture to get your eyes trained. So in this picture, we got a corn midrib in the middle. We've got leafhoppers on the left and the right, and you kind of get a scale for what they look like. You see that tan yellowish color blends in with damaged leaf tissue. They like to hang out in the shaded areas of the plants. They're very skittish. They'll crawl around to the other side of the leaves to avoid you. They will jump off, they will fly. They're extremely mobile and very hard to scout. If you walk into a field that's very infested, you'll also often notice them, they'll leave plants and you get kind of sparkles in the air, from my experience in very infested fields. And so that's something you can, if you notice that, you might want to try to look really, really closely to find them. So historical range, I'll get into this real quick. So it was unprecedented that this insect and the disease showed up in the Midwest. As you can see, all these blue dots is where corn leafhopper is historically located and a problem. The origin is central Mexico, so it's very a southern latitude insect. But you'll see 3 dots in the United States: Southern California, Southern Texas, and Florida. They've been present in causing issues for decades, and we'll talk about those locations right now. So in California, and I'll kind of go through these a little bit quickly, I want you to just understand a pattern from these. These are reports and dates based on publications that I found for these locations. And you'll notice one thing I just want to highlight is large gaps between issues. So we'll go through each state and you'll see the same pattern. So basically every state in 1940s recorded corn leafhopper infesting corn. In California, it was in a couple counties, and there was enough corn leafhoppers to be damaging young plants to warrant publication. And it was a first observation of corn leafhopper. 20 years later, about, another big noticeable infestation of corn leafhopper showed up. 1980s, the same thing, but now they had the corn stunt disease showing up. And then since the late 90s, that San Joaquin Valley has basically been dealing with corn leafhopper and corn stunt annually since then. Kind of the same thing for Texas, 1940s. Very, very southern Texas, right on the border of Mexico. They had major corn leafhopper issues and disease. There was a huge delay between the next issue. In 2016, entomologists were doing surveys, found significant leafhopper populations, and there's a publication that came out that they were reestablished in Texas, and then it's been an issue in the very southern tip of Texas since then with corn stunt. In Florida, same thing, very southern Florida, mainly in sweet corn. And hurricanes, they think, probably blew in the pest into Florida. It's found statewide, but it's only an issue in South Florida, and they've had issues since the 60s for that. So it's been present in the country. To have it spread to all these states with red stars in one season was never on anybody's radar. So all those states had notable corn leafhopper populations. I don't know about the presence of disease in all the states. Obviously, Kansas did have that corn stunt. And so that's just give you an overall how unprecedented this was. So that was unexpected, just so put that in perspective. And I will say, as you see that caveat up there, there were specimens from the 1980s that are on record for corn leafhopper from Ohio. So we don't know how long this pest has been coming in and out of North America, but it was very significant in 2024. So going forward, obviously wrapping things up, we need to actively look for corn leafhopper going into this season. Luckily, it's pretty easy to scout for this. We are using yellow sticky traps. You can use those early in the season to monitor for the presence of corn leafhopper. We're using them through the winter because we're trying to answer some questions about are they present all winter, things like that. Mid-season, look into the whorls of the corn so you know if they're there, they'll be hiding in that shade of the whorls. Well, mid to late season, you can scout tall corn with a sweep net. Instead of going side to side, you go up and down the plants through the rows, and they're real easy to dump into a bag and find there. And then also the yellow sticky traps we use throughout the growing season, just to monitor for the presence to see what they're there. So it's really easy to scout for, so in low tech, so that's great. And so getting into how to potentially deal with this pest, there's a lot of questions we don't know how to answer based on some other regions' advice. There are resistant varieties in South America that's obviously needs more research in North America. One thing is planting as early as possible. We want to make sure we get our corn up and growing and past that V8 stage as soon as possible. Beyond V8, losses will be a lot less severe if the corn is attacked and infested. Insecticides are a possibility, but probably not economical. But that's something I actually have a trial going into this coming season just to see. And we want to control alternate hosts. So end of the season, if this is going to be a pest we have to deal with, we have to destroy volunteer corn as soon as possible. And we have to control Johnson grass. That's an alternate host. So what we know basically in 2024, and this might be a little outdated, Rodrigo can add to it, but there were 26 counties that tested positive for corn stunt. Those were counties that just submitted leaf material to get tested. So it was probably much more widespread. The vector itself, the corn leafhopper, was found statewide, all over the place, all the way up to Nebraska. So it was everywhere. And we know neighboring states experience the same kind of thing. What we don't know, what does this mean for Kansas production in corn going forward? We're working that out. The big thing is, what we've been addressing over winter is can it overwinter? We've been trapping. There has been some positive results for corn leafhopper in southern tier of Kansas through February, definitely early December, but we're gonna be making sure we're double checking our identifications. And so we're gonna keep everyone informed about that as we go into corn growing season. And so with that, just my last question, I hope that gave you some information that helps you. For folks that were unaware, it seems like there's a lot. Did that help you maybe get an idea of how to identify this pest, or at least recognize issues and maybe with Rodrigo's material, you'll be able to recognize issues even better, you know, because you need the vector and you also need symptoms to know that you're dealing with corn stunt. So thank you for attending, and I appreciate your time.
Okay, we've got responses rolling in here, guys. We'll give you just a couple more seconds. Anthony, one question that I saw in the Q&A box, and we'll come back to it, but we'll finish the poll here. Is sorghum considered an alternative host for corn leafhoppers?
In the literature, there are a lot of plants listed for alternative hosts. That's a great question because the corn leafhopper can feed on a lot of different plants and survive, but they can only reproduce on corn. So sorghum will not be a reservoir to increase populations of corn leafhopper. So that's what I said, we have to control our volunteer corn in the late season because they will be laying eggs and reproducing all the way into a freeze on that volunteer corn. And if they are doing that, and if they can overwinter, then we're going to get next spring and have a big population. But no, I wouldn't say sorghum is a reproductive host. They might subsist on it while it's around, but it's not going to increase populations.
Great. Okay. So Helen, if you want to get the rest of the questions and answers, we'll go ahead and end the poll here and share the results. So Anthony, 75% says yes, 25% says partially.
Okay. Well,
So
that's great. And so any additional questions? Obviously, there'll be more rolling as Rodrigo talks about his material. And I'm always available to be contacted at any time for additional questions, even after this, as we get into corn growing season. So thank you, everybody, again.
okay, Helen, do you have a couple of specific questions for Anthony as we're getting slides switched over here?
Yeah, there's some that popped up on our Q&A, and I think some of them have been addressed. One of them is, will traps be available through KSRE?
We will, for interested, and Rodrigo can chime in on this as well, for participants that want to help out monitoring throughout corn growing season, we will have some materials available to send, but we do need to make sure people are aware we will need to have traps put out and sent back to us weekly. So there is a little bit of commitment there, but we can get you supplies if you're interested and committed to helping out with that. But we are going to be transitioning to trapping just in corn at the end of March. We've been trapping in a lot of different scenarios right now, and we've learned that corn leafhopper is potentially, you know, very widespread in the environment, overwintering in a lot of different kind of situations. So yes, reach out to me or Rodrigo if you're interested in assisting going into the season.
Another one we have, I know you said some winds would blow them in, but how are they moving with the wind, or are they moving in other ways also?
Yeah, so that's a big question. They probably did show up in the Midwest due to weather patterns. You know, it's not uncommon for small insects like this to be moved long distances by wind currents and you know, storms and things like that. Sorghum aphid is a perfect example of that. We don't know if this is going to be a pattern now we have to deal with. Maybe it blows in every year. We don't know. We're still waiting to figure that out. But and then the fact that it maybe could subsist more in the Midwest might have to do with changing winter patterns. You know, warmer winters might help with that. So that's still up in the air, and that's just speculation.
The last one we've got here on Zoom, do other animals feed on corn leafhoppers?
Yes, I mean, you know, a lot of predatory insects would eat leafhoppers, but leafhoppers are extremely mobile, very fast, hard to catch. So I would not put my money on beneficial insects controlling this problem.
We just had another one that came in also. So what percentage of them carry the infection?
We do not know, and that's something Rodrigo can touch on, I'm sure.
Good question. Sometimes what we saw last year from data from other labs is very little is carrying the disease. But I'll get into that question as we talk here too.
Great. I think we're ready to switch gears. Thanks, Anthony. And you'll be around to continue to answer questions. Rodrigo, if
will.
you're ready to go ahead and share your slides, we can sure make the switch here.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Rodrigo Onofre. I'm the assistant professor, row crop pathologist here at K-State. Started about 4 years ago and still learning a lot about Kansas and the landscape. So jumping right to it into corn stunt. When we think about corn stunt disease complex, right, we have to keep in mind that we're talking about 4 different pathogens. The first two bacteria, we have corn stunt spiroplasma and maize bushy stunt phytoplasma. The last two, they're virus, maize rhabdophenovirus, and maize striatomosaic virus. The last one is not detected, not present in US so far. So the 3 potential virus and this bacteria that we're going to be talking about today is corn stunt spiroplasma, maize bush stunt phytoplasma, and maize rhabdophenovirus. Those are the things that has been reported in Texas, Florida before, right? So the most important one in this complex is going to be the first one, which is Spiroplasma conchelli, considered the most important and widespread pathogen. So Zukoff talked a lot about the transmission and how important those leafhoppers are, right? So just a quick overview here. When we think about this system where you have a leafhopper and a disease that's transmitted by the leafhopper, right? So we started with, that phloem feeding. Those are restricted phloem pathogens that the leafhopper has to acquire from infected corn plants. So for example, warmer temperatures, let's say Texas has corn plants that are infected over the winter there, and this leafhopper is moving to Kansas. That could be a way that we are getting this leafhopper and the disease in the upper Midwest, right? And then it takes about up to 28 days for the pathogens to replicate inside the insect and then be ready to colonize, or I guess inoculate the plants, right? After those 28 days, then the leafhoppers are going to be ready to transmit back the disease. So, and now it takes only about 1 hour, half an hour, and 8 hours, depending on the pathogen there, for the leafhopper to transmit that disease back into the new corn plants, right? Now, what's tricky about this disease is, okay, the transmission happened, the corn plants are infected, but it takes up to 40 days for us to see symptoms in the field. So if infection happens between VE emergence to V8, we're going to see symptoms early in the reproductive stage, right? And that's going to be at higher risk of yield impact. But if infection is happening later in the season, let's say around VTR1 or 2, we'll likely not even see symptoms in our cornfields, right? So that's the challenge with this disease. So spiroplasma, as I mentioned, they're like a bacteria like structures. Lack of cell wall, do not possess flagella, and again, the primary vector is the double mate, right? It's a phloem restricted pathogen, so any growing tissue will be able to see this pathogen. So we have, the leaves, the roots, but the tassel, but we test when you're sending a sample to the lab. We're requesting right now leaves and possibly stalks as well for the testing. It can rapidly transmit, especially in younger plants. We see things happening faster than mature plants. I think there's some ontogenic resistance going on there that needs to be studied. One thing it is important for us to keep in mind is there are no reports that these are being transmitted to seeds. So everything that we're planting, it's going to be clean, right? No, it's going to be disease-free. And something that's also interesting is that the leafhopper females do not transmit the disease to their spawn, right? Again, the leafhopper has to acquire from somewhere. So what happened last year, right? Just a recap here in 2024. August 7th, I got a call from Aida Dufek. She's the row crop specialist in Oklahoma, saying that she had found the corn leafhopper and suspecting of corn stunt disease in Oklahoma. I drove to Oklahoma. We scouted parallel to Kansas several fields. On my way back, I stopped in the first cornfield, and we're seeing a lot of leaf hoppers, right? A lot of corn leaf hoppers. A lot of folks are, well, we have leaf hoppers in Kansas, and we do, but what's important here is that double maize, the corn leaf hopper, is the only one that transmit the three disease that we have in US, right? Just keep that in mind. And here's a video of a crop consultant sent it to me, kind of like represented what we saw last year with like clouds of leaf hoppers across the state. We saw a variety of symptoms, and when we think about corn stunted plants is one of the symptoms, but we also see chlorotic stripes, yellow stripes, that mid-rib purple, and as well the whole plant being purple, right? One thing to keep in mind too is, if a deer eats that ear, we have sugar accumulation, and those plants also becomes purple. I think one of the main differences that we saw last year is that we were seeing like high numbers, high severity of plants in a field, right? So here's another field with high severity, high incidence of this disease in central Kansas, right? So you guys can see the amount of purple corn this disease was present in this field. So another symptom that's also related to this corn stunt disease complex is the chlorotic streaks. A lot of the times associated more with virus, with the last one, right? Maize striatum mosaic virus, but it can be a way for us to identify in the field. Of course, yield impact can be severe, especially if infection is happening early on in the season. Those pictures are from Dr. Dufek in Oklahoma, but you can see the yield impact that it can be, right? So as I said, we, just to show you guys here, regular-ish corn plant size, right, in the stunted right next to it. Proliferation of ears, honestly, we saw this more on that further southwest part of the state in Kansas, and we saw corn plants with 3, 5, 6, and 7 years as well, right? Another symptom of this disease. Stay green, also related with corn stunt, and something to keep in mind too as we get into the season. Again, these pathogens can really change pretty much the structure of the plant, right? And have this yield impact. And we saw about like anywhere from 20 to 40% of stay green plants when folks were harvesting. One of the worst fields that I visit, and we confirm it through molecular ID, it was in Rice County. We saw about 100 bushels yield difference in the past 5 years. But again, hundreds of leaf hopper. The disease was confirmed, and the symptoms we saw stunted plants, chlorotic stripes, reddening of the leaf tips, and that was August 27. So this is Dr. Dufek in Oklahoma had this field with about 25,000 plants. First report of corn stunt in that field was August 1st, and we're gonna see here how it spread in a fairly short amount of time. So August 15 now, we have the diseased plants, broken plants, and as time goes, this is the second week, we're starting to see a lot more plants infected with symptoms. 3 weeks and 4 weeks, right? So that's why we worry about the disease. There's a concern about the potential impact of corn stunt in the Midwest because it can be quickly transmitted and as well have a high yield impact to it. So at the end, we saw about 61% of the plants had the disease and only 39% were healthy. So, going back again to 2024, what we saw was the worst part was anything that was planted after June 10th, June 15, which is hitting either our double crop corn or our lated plant corn, right? So I think going to the 2025 season, it's wise to say that we're going to be at higher risk for our double crop corn and late planted corn just because of the unknown, right? We still don't know. A lot of questions. We still don't know if this is going to be around again for this upcoming season. So there's just a lot of questions, and the risk could be higher for folks that are going to be going with the late planted corn or double crop corn, right? So just imagine if the leaf hopper arrives, let's say in the reproductive stage of our first crop around R1, R2, those leafhoppers are going to be moving to the double crop corn when they're around between that emergence to V10, right? And that's the highest, I would say, risk for yield impact when we think about corn stunt disease. So just to bring everything together, we talk about corn stunted plants, chloroic stripes spreading off the tip of the leaves, irregular reddish purple streaks, and proliferation of ears. So one thing that is interesting, again, reinforcing the amount of time that takes for us to see the symptoms in the field. There was this group in South America that did this study here. So you see that with the triangle, they detected the disease after 10 days in the lab, but it took 40 days with this hybrid for them to see the symptoms in the field. The second hybrid, they were able to detect in the lab after 20 days, but it took about 60 days for them to see the symptoms, right? So there is a hybrid to hybrid susceptibility there. Another work that has been done not so long ago, it shows here 4 different hybrids responding differently to the disease. So the first one, we're seeing a lot more severe stunted plants, which is the black stunted plants, leaf with stripes. The COB 670. And the last one, we see a lot less symptoms, right? Those hybrids are from South America, so there's not much for us here in terms of the corn stunt disease complex in US right now. But I think it's important for us to keep in mind that different hybrids will respond differently for this disease. So just keep that in mind as we go into the upcoming season. So, and again, the symptoms are going to be more evident later, right? When we get into the reproductive stage, that's when we're like, what's going on to my crop, right? Why I have stunted plants. So it takes really a long time for us to know when we start seeing the disease. So just again, a recap, Oklahoma reported August 12 for the first time last year, then Missouri reported August 16th, and us reported here in Kansas August 29th, the first time that of this disease in Kansas, right? As Zukoff already mentioned, we reported corn stunt disease in 26 counties last year. It was late in the season, so we didn't have samples from southeast part of the state, but we still had a lot of positives in the state, right? That's the final map of place where this disease has never been reported before. So Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Indiana, and up into New York too, we had positives of corn stunt disease. So as Zukoff said, monitoring will be important as we get into this upcoming season, early and as well as late. And we had a lot of questions, and I still have a lot of questions, to be honest, regarding corn stunt disease complex and this leafhopper as well. And one of the questions, fairly simple question that we're trying to answer right now is, can this leafhopper overwinter in Kansas, right? We have other leafhoppers that can be a problem as the alfalfa leafhopper, we have wheat leafhopper, but can this corn leafhopper survive here in Kansas? To answer that, we started what we call like the K-trap monitoring system. So we have been monitoring corn leafhopper in alfalfa, corn stubbles, native grass, rice, sorghum stubble, soybean stubble, triticale, wheat, and wheat stubble over the winter, right? Again, just to answer a simple question, is this leafhopper surviving here in Kansas? That's how it looks when we enter the data in the system. The traps were placed in the edge of the fields, and we have been doing this every 2 weeks here in Kansas. So when we started this project, I had in mind of like having about 10 sites. We ended up having 85 locations over the winter with more than 40 K-trappers, folks trapping it for us and sending those leaf hoppers, those sticky traps to us here in the lab. So we have been putting a lot of effort in trying to understand the landscape of potential survival here in Kansas, right? And to look at the preliminary data, here are some numbers since we started trapping back in December. So we see active, this corn leaf hopper throughout the winter, right? The last one we have here is from February 21st. So we're seeing this leaf hopper here in Kansas. But the next steps and something that we're going to do next here is just to verify these leaf hoppers through molecular identification. So we are sure that those are diplomades and potentially transmitting the disease over the winter, right? We're also going to be looking to other leaf hoppers such as aster leaf hopper, other genus of leaf hoppers as well, just to quantify what we have. So next steps here, we're going to go back to every leaf hopper and molecular verify that what we actually saw is the diplomades, right? So just a few take-home messages here. Again, there are no curative strategies for corn stunt. After the plants are infected, there's nothing to do in the field. There's a diversity of symptoms, between emergence and V8, that's going to be the most susceptible and potentially highest yielding impact that we're going to see that infection happening. Hybrids can react different to the corn stunt. Avoid late planting date and or double crop corn for this upcoming season just because of the risk of the disease and his risk of yield impact, right? And of course, if you have a field that has been confirmed with corn stunt, do not plant nearby, right? Because we know that those leaf hoppers are going to move into the younger plants and will also infect those, right? Volunteer corn plants can be a source of inoculum as well. And making sure that you're going to be testing and monitoring for corn stunt pathogens in this upcoming season. It's going to be the key for management, right? So make sure to submit samples to the K-State Plant Diagnostic Lab. So there are a lot of folks that help with this monitoring system, especially. We're very grateful for the Kansas Association of Independent Crop Consultants, Kansas Corn, and Corteva as well for all their support. Anthony, Tina, and a lot of KSRE crop agents, right? So big thank you to all of them. I'll take any questions now.
All right, we've got a few questions here on Zoom. The first one is, can they carry bacterial leaf streak as well?
Good question. I have never heard about that before. So we could look at it, but I would say that from what I know, the answer is it's no.
Rodrigo,
Right,
what is the vector for bacterial leaf streak? Do we know?
So bacterial leaf streak is one of the diseases that we see it more through wind, or we have like a dust storm surviving possibly over the winter too, in crop residue. Yeah, I'm not sure if associated with a vector, to be honest, Jeannie.
Great. Well, that was my question, since it's a bacteria, what is actually moving it? And so in my mind, it was kind of environmental, that it was kind of just around. And when we have the right conditions, it tends to be a problem, and it overwinters and residues. So
yes.
And maybe a good point, just since you're talking about overwintering and residue, there's no concern, and please correct me, Rodrigo, if I'm wrong, but for corn stunt, there's, it can't survive outside of the leaf hopper, and it can't survive in residue or the kernels of the corn, right? So
Right.
there's no concern about infected kernels being, in this environment.
Yes, absolutely. So corn stunt disease complex does not survive in crop residue. And that's why we always thought that wouldn't be a problem in the Midwest, right? We're like really far north. We could have like this reset every year. I guess does the pathogen survive in dead manure corn plants? No, it does not survive. Could it be we're looking for more for it? I'm not sure, Marvin, what you mentioned there. Oh, looking. Yes, I see what you're saying. So we're definitely trapping more. So the chance that we're gonna get this corn leaf hopper is higher in the winter, right? Now the difference here, Marvin, is that last year we had an epidemic and we had yield impact, right? And we never had that before here in Kansas and other states as well. It's actually being Florida, Texas, California problem, but never a yield problem for us in the Midwest. Argentina, South America, Brazil, they have fought with this disease for the past 10 years. So it's definitely a problem in South America, but just because of that system of growing corn all year round, right? So it always green tissue and the host around. So
All right, another question we have, can the pathogens be passed from an infected female to her progeny?
no, cannot.
All right, and then, oh, sorry, do you have more on that one?
Yeah, I was just gonna say the leafhopper has to acquire from somewhere that had from a corn plant with the corn disease complex, and then transmit that to new plants. Now, what's interesting is that when the female acquires that, and both can acquire, male and female, they tend to survive longer, the ones that have the leafhopper that has the disease complex on it.
The last question we have here, can corn planted in wheat stubble have a lower infection rate?
I'm not aware of Oklahoma State mentioning that, and I'm not aware of any research on that end. I think the infection rate there, it will depend if the amount of leafhoppers that are around, and within those, the amount that it's carrying the disease, right? Just keep in mind that, things are going to happen way faster from emergence to V10 and then tends to slow down in terms of disease transmission later on. So the hope is that this leafhopper is not around when we're planting corn, and even if it shows up in Kansas, right, it shows up later in the season. That's kind of like past that point of any yield damage for us. What's important, it's monitoring the leafhopper, making sure that we're aware how to identify, submit samples to the K-State Diagnostic Lab, work with your K-State agents to send us samples as well, and we'll work together to answer some of the ongoing questions.
Exactly. So what we're doing here, trapping through the winter, and I know there's been some folks being like, why are you trapping when, we got Arctic temperatures, we're being proactive about this because we don't know what to expect. So we're putting all this effort and time into just being careful to make sure everyone's informed going into corn growing season. And so that's why we're continuing to do it, through winter into corn growing season, because we need to get a handle on what's going on, even if maybe it was a one-off, hopefully, and we just don't have a problem with it this year. But we're being very careful, and we want to make sure we don't lose control of this, because there are some things we can do and some very simple management decisions that can be made to reduce losses as long as we're paying attention to the trends of leafhoppers coming into the state. When do they come into the state? Are they staying? Things like that. We got to get a handle on it. And so that's why we're spending so much time and effort and having so many talks about this. So I hope attendees understand that and go away with a bit more understanding about the potential risks for this, even though we're not saying the sky's falling, but we need to have it on our radar.
I did get a question on my email, Anthony, is about chemical control, insecticide control of these insects. Are we ever at a place where it makes sense to think about an insecticide application for the leafhoppers?
Well, so, there's a lot of products that'll kill leafhoppers, no matter the species. They're all going to be pyrethroids or organophosphates, so broad spectrum, kill everything in the field. There will likely have to be multiple applications from emergence through V8. So I'm not an economist, and I don't want to be. I just like insects. So I can't comment on that. It doesn't seem like it would be economic, but at the same time, even if it's economic, the products that you're using to treat for leafhopper, you're killing everything, and spider mite flares will definitely go. in corn. So that's something to consider.
By taking care of one insect, we might be creating ourselves an insect problem on the spider mite side of things.
Yeah, and spider mites in western Kansas have been pretty tame for a few years, which is very strange. So let's not get those flared up again.
Yes, yes. Marvin asked a Savanto. Is that an insecticide option?
I know Savanto is really easy on beneficials compared to some other things. I would have to look at the label to see if leafhoppers are on it, just to be, careful in what I recommend. But
Right.
I think probably, but that is a good option. Savanto is a good option to be easier on beneficials. So look at the label.
Great. One other question, and Helen, sorry, I'm jumping on your question and answer thing. Are the traps set inside the field or on the outside perimeter of the field? Where are we really trapping to find them?
So right now the traps are being placed in the edge of the field, right? And they're all non-corn fields just because we don't have any corn in the ground. Maybe we do this week, but I think the strategy, just to further in this question here, as we get into the corn season, that we'll have to trap in corn fields, right? There is the overwinter trapping. That's what we're doing right now. We'll have to stop that at the end of March and then switch our gears, switch our focus into trapping at cornfields. And in cornfields, as the plants are growing, we're gonna have to adjust the height of those traps as well, right? To be parallel to that can up there. But yes, so edge of the field, easy, just can stop your truck, put the trap out 2 weeks or a week later, come back and collect that, right?